Hello and welcome to my presentation for my Unit 15, which is Poverty in Contemporary Britain. So we're going to first start by defining poverty. So what is poverty? Defining poverty helps individuals and officials to understand poverty, shape policies, social attitudes towards poverty and funding towards changing poverty. Poverty can be measured based on median household income, so at 6% less than the median income is classified as poverty. There are two main types of poverty. There's absolute poverty and relative poverty. So, absolute poverty is where individuals lack the basic resources needed to sustain life. Absolute poverty makes it impossible to participate fully in society. Individuals or families in absolute poverty cannot afford to access food, clean water, shelter, education or healthcare. So the threshold for absolute poverty does not change as a country's economy grows. The UN definition is where individuals cannot afford food, clothing or housing. So this is very similar to the ones above. In the UK it is defined as being 6% below the median income level. The UK government includes housing prices in poverty, as these vary drastically up and down the country. So if you live in London, it's going to be significantly higher than if you live somewhere in Newcastle or. So it's calculated before and after the housing costs have been taken into account, just to make sure that the balance is fair. Relative poverty is where individuals have significantly less income than the nationwide household average. However, these individuals can afford the basic needs that are highlighted previously, but it would be the bare minimum of these basics, and they'd probably be likely of poor quality. So this level of poverty can change based on the levels of economic growth, so that changes based on the basic needs of the people. So relative poverty reflects that there is inequality in society, as individuals have just enough to participate, however they will not have enough to participate fully. Individuals or families in relative poverty lack items that are considered societal norms. This can include no or limited internet access, poor quality housing in potentially hazardous conditions, no money for new clothes or uniform, and no money for leisure activities like trips or clubs. Living in relative poverty can be persistent and extremely difficult to escape. Persistent poverty is where an individual or family lives in relative poverty for 2 out of the 3 years, and this makes living in persistent relative poverty extremely difficult to escape, as they have no way to live at the same standard as others, meaning that they are essentially trapped in a low income environment. This can be due to not having access to higher quality education or access to equipment that will help them with their studies. In the UK, this is defined as being 60% of the median household income. So poverty in Britain, and how has it changed over time? Poverty has always been present in society. Poverty has always involved limited resources, economic inequality, and lack of safety nets. So in the Industrial Revolution and urbanisation of the 18th and 19th centuries, living conditions worsened, led to cramped housing and poor wages. Labour movements emerged, helping to increase the standard of living and working conditions. The early 20th century saw social welfare reform. It aimed to improve the quality of living and reduce poverty. The Great Depression in the 1930s exposed the vulnerabilities of society's ability to fall into poverty when economic conditions changed rapidly. This led to increased safety nets within society. In the mid-20th century, the UN introduced goals that focus on relieving poverty and promoting equality globally. With the 21st century, the aims are to tackle the root causes of poverty, ensuring that sustainability and development in areas where poverty is prevalent. Working class poverty again has increased again in modern times due to the cost of living crisis, where housing, bills and the rising cost of food have increased significantly, with little or no increase to an individual or family's income. The change in the benefit system to universal credit has seen income reduced for those on benefits, increasing numbers of rough sleepers and those dependent on food banks. There have been positive changes with better labour conditions, the introduction of the welfare state in the NHS, increased access to technology and education. However, the core issues of poverty remain the same since the 1900s, with low wages, high unemployment, poor housing and general inequality. So poverty, and how and why do we measure it? Poverty needs to be measured in order to allocate the resources, shape social policy and identify the groups and people who are most at risk. Charles Booth was a social reformer who conducted a study in the East End of London between 1892 and 1897 and found that 35% of people lived in abject poverty. He tracked this on the first poverty map, using colour to differentiate between poor areas and affluent areas. He created the poverty line concept, which highlighted the minimum needed income to cover basic needs at the time. Seaborn Rowntree, inspired by the works of Charles Booth, studied poverty between 1897 and 1898 in York, where he found 28% of the population lived below the poverty line. And from his study, he introduced two types of poverty. Primary poverty, so that's the way the income is sufficient to meet the basic needs, and secondary poverty, where the income is sufficient, however the money is misused, misspent on things like alcohol and gambling. So the works of Booth and Rowntree have laid the foundations for the modern welfare state. These early methods are key as they have helped to define modern poverty. They have introduced the poverty line, which is still used in modern day statistics for measuring poverty. The definition of more than one type of poverty has led to multiple types of poverty definitions that we have today. So just continuing on from that, so modern poverty in the UK is measured using three methods. So that's household below average income, persistent poverty and absolute low income. So HBAI is measured on equivalised disposable income that is adjusted per household size. That's 6% of the below the national median income. So it's calculated as wages plus benefits less the tax equals your disposable income. Persistent poverty is where a household is below the poverty line for 2 out of 3 years and focuses on long-term deprivation. Absolute low income compares income to a fixed historical benchmark that is adjusted then for inflation. This is used as a measure to see if poverty is improving over time. Relative poverty versus absolute poverty measures that they are both measured at 6% of the median income. Relative is for the current year and absolute uses the benchmark adjusted for inflation. The relative measure adjusts with the economy to track inequality and reflects current living standards. The absolute measure is only useful to compare trends over time. Relative poverty excels at tracking inequality and social inclusion, whilst absolute poverty is extremely useful to track whether basic income standards are improving. The UK is working towards using a hybrid measure that will be used to measure poverty. This aims to combine the data with access to goods and services showing a real world impact. The constant updating and improving on poverty measures lets policy makers see the trends and changes over time. It also allows them to address new causes and inequalities before they become major issues. And that's it. Thank you for listening to my presentation.